Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be here with you this afternoon, and I thank you for coming here on a Friday afternoon before a weekend and in this this very rainy afternoon. Without further ado, let me move on and give you an introduction into how we are doing more participatory planning in, there we go, in New York City. Take you on a journey of where we started out in our past history, how we currently, how we evolved in the planning process, the public review process, and give you an example of how we do public participation currently under our mayor's Housing New York plan, and then tell you a little bit about our reaction by the public to that process, and then hopefully afterwards we'll have a good discussion about that, and if you have any questions and comments about that. So first, some background to how the public participation process, how the land use process used to operate. And there are some key events here to keep in mind. One is a gentleman by the name of Robert Moses. Then there is Pennsylvania Station, a beautiful railway station, civic activism, as well as an entity that used to decide land use that we called the Board of Estimate. So starting with Robert Moses. I don't know if many of you are familiar with New York City and Robert Moses. If you're a New Yorker, you know this name. It's ingrained. There is a highway named after him, a parkway named after him, and a beach named after him. He was a force of, not quite nature, but of construction. He started out his career as Parks Commissioner, became construction coordinator for the city of New York, headed an entity called the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, and was a member of the New York City Planning Commissioner. And he was also known, the short name for him, or title, was Master Builder. Sometimes people say that he forgot that he had a first name. Robert Moses was responsible for building major parks throughout New York City and New York State, and was somewhat of a reformer in the 1920s and 1930s. He was also the builder of the World's Fair grounds, both for the 1937 World's Fair and the 1967 World's Fair. He built public housing, he built the United Nations, as well as Lincoln Center, a cultural icon in New York City. But he's most infamously remembered in New York City for his construction of highways. New York City does not have many highways, but it does have some. Robert Moses built virtually all of them. He also built virtually all of New York City's bridges and tunnels. He was head of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which gave him the authority to build and condemn property for the purposes of bridges. And what he was most infamous for was building highways through densely populated areas without regard to public sentiments, to neighborhoods, to communities, to people. Some people say that he loved the public, but he didn't like people. Oops. The next seminal event that took place in New York City was the demolition of Pennsylvania Station. This is a train station that was built in the 1910s by the famous American architecture firm of McKim, Mead & White. It was modeled after the Baths of Caracalla in Italy. And it was demolished in 1963 and replaced by an office building complex as well as Madison Square Garden. And when news came of the demolition of Penn Station, people were in an uproar. There were large protests, numerous protests by famous people, famous architects, but it was to no avail. There was no law stopping the demolition of this building, and it was replaced by Madison Square Garden and an office complex, as I said, that has really no life to it and is pretty much despised by many people who care about New York City. The other seminal event is one that took place all over the United States, and that's civic activism. The 1960s especially, and the 1970s, were a time of civil rights movement. Mainly African Americans, especially in the South, with support from many white Americans, asking for their equal rights with those of others. It was also a time when communities started to wake up to the folks like Robert Moses, to the demolition of things like the Pennsylvania train station. And the embodiment of that civil rights movement was Robert Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, the president, who helped start a community development corporation in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Bedford-Stuyvesant. And the idea of that was to give communities power, to empower them, to plan and to build and develop within their own community. And that group, the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, exists to this day. And in fact, my fellow panelist and colleague, Alex Sommer, once worked for them. And the other one, the other noteworthy person here is Jane Jacobs. I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote a great book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She was a journalist, and she simply wrote about her observations of the city. And she wrote in very simple terms, but made the city interesting and pointed out the things that are so important about it. And so Jane Jacobs' book and her views about the city and the values of the city, or the values of community, the sidewalk, the local scale, are something that is remembered to this day more than 50 years after publication of that book. So until the 1990s, actually, New York City's land use process was pretty much decided with one entity called the Board of Estimate. It's an old body, and it was mostly populated by old men, that ruled how land use decisions were made in New York City. And you can see in the top picture, that was the hearing room in City Hall. And they sat around a podium like that you see there. And you can see in the lower picture, people, applicants would present to this board. And you can see the public in the background. And there wasn't much opportunity for the public to participate in this process. There was the concept of community planning boards that existed at that time, local community boards, volunteers who made advisory recommendations. But for the most part, the Board of Estimate ruled how land use were governed. And it was really almost like a horse trading thing, where you can see that the mayor had 2 votes, the president of the city council had 2, the comptroller had 2, and the borough presidents each have 1 vote. And as a result, they were able to, if all the borough presidents' nominees would coalesce together, if they could pick off one of the citywide ones, they could thwart the mayor's plans. So the mayor needed to cut deals with the other members of this board in order to get his ideas passed, or for a private applicant to get their ideas passed. So it was dominated by borough and citywide decision makers. It had only a small role for communities and the city council. It was a lot of backroom deal making, and it was literally backroom. If you look right there in the back there are 2 doors, and people, they would actually walk in there. This existed up until 1991 when I was already working for the department, and I watched this deal-making taking place. And eventually, this Board of Estimate was deemed unconstitutional because it violated the concept of 1 person, 1 vote of our Constitution, and so it was replaced by a system that I'll explain in a moment. Whoops, that's going backwards. So this is another concept that came out of the 1960s. It's by an author by the name of Sherry Arnstein, and it's called The Ladder of Citizen Participation. Remember, this was a time of civic activism. This is when people started to speak up and speak out about land use, about all kinds of issues, social issues especially. And it starts out at the bottom rung with non-participation and manipulation and therapy. And it goes up in terms of participation level to tokenism, informing, consultation, placation. And finally, it reaches the height of citizen power. So partnership, delegated power, and ultimately citizen control. And the question that I always ask my students is, where are we, where should we be, and where could we be? What are the drawbacks and advantages of full citizen control and no citizen control? So here's how land use decisions are done, reviewed right now in New York City with an acronym that we, sort of weird, it's called ULURP. It stands for Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, and I have to admit that I'm feel a little strange talking about something so arcane with you all here, but I hope that it's somewhat informative as it relates to how Singapore conducts its public review. So ULURP is the procedure by which local communities, other elected officials decide on land use changes that are affecting either a small property, a large property, a whole area, a whole part of the city. And it was started in the 1970s, in 1977, with a change to our city constitution that also instituted environmental review. And the idea was public disclosure, transparency, that there should be public hearings, the concept of public being able to voice their opinion to the decision makers, to be heard, to have their voices be recognized, as well as to understand what are the environmental consequences, the environmental impacts that might occur if a decision were made. So some of the players in the land use review are, first and foremost, is our mayor. He's elected by the city's voters. He is a strong mayor, or our mayor, just with a small m, if you will, is known as a strong mayor government. He sets the city's land use policy. And I say he because it's always been a he. There was a chance it could have been a woman the last time around. That didn't happen. The mayor appoints a majority of the City Planning Commission, which is also a major player in land use, with the consent of the City Council. And very importantly, because he's Alex's and my boss, he appoints the director of our agency. So I have to be nice to him. There's the City Planning Commission. This is an independent body set up by the city charter, that's our constitution, which is responsible for the orderly growth, improvement, and future development of our city. And the City Planning Commission has an actual deciding vote. It can actually can stop a land use proposal, or it can send it on for its final consideration to the City Council, or it can make changes within a certain range. The City Planning Commission consists of 13 members, a majority of whom are appointed by the mayor. 6 are by the mayor, 5 by the borough president, 1 by a public advocate, and the mayor appoints the chair of the City Planning Commission, who serves at the pleasure of the mayor, whereas the other commission members serve for a period of 5 years. There's also the public advocate. This is a citywide position, and as it says, it's supposed to be an advocate for the public, a counterweight, if you will, to the mayor. And the public advocate appoints 1 member to the City Planning Commission I just mentioned. There are borough presidents. We have 5 major parts of our city. There's Manhattan, the most famous one. The other most famous one is Brooklyn, of course, my borough. There's Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx. So each of them have a president, and each president gets to appoint a member of the City Planning Commission, and they have and the borough presidents themselves have an advisory role, so they can voice an opinion about land use within their jurisdiction, within their borough. And then there's the City Council. It is 55 members elected by the residents of each district. There are about 150 to 200,000 residents per district. And the City Council actually has the final say in the land use decision process. And then there are the community boards. And this is really where the public gets involved. Community boards consist of up to 50 volunteer members, although you can join a committee of these community boards. They represent a district. So there are 59 community districts in New York City, and each one of them has one of these boards of up to 50 volunteers. They're officially appointed by the borough presidents. They elect a chair who speaks for the board and is often quoted in newspapers if there are land use issues. And the community boards have an advisory role in land use policies for their area, for their district. And then there are other influencers, of course. They don't have a direct role in the land use decision-making process, but they have an influence. They speak from the outside. They may speak at public hearings. They may make their voices heard in other ways. And those include other elected officials from different levels. We have state and federal levels, civic associations, business interest groups, and very importantly, individual residents. You do not have to be a member of a civic association of any kind of group to speak as a member of the public before a public hearing of the City Planning Commission or the council or the community board. And then the city agencies, we as bureaucrats also have some influence. So what actions, that's planner speak. What land use decisions are subject to the public review process in our city? It's zoning. Zoning limits what you can build and how much of it on a piece of land. Changes to our city map, so how our streets are built and designed. The sale or acquisition, purchase of property by and for the city. Special permits, and then there are other authorizations and smaller actions that are subject to land use review. And this is a broad chart that displays it. What's significant about the ULURP process is that it's time limited once it gets started. So, but before it gets started, in order to make a change in zoning in a city map or a special permit, you have to first submit an application that describes what it is that is being supposed to be changed. And our job is to review the completeness of that application. Is all the information there for decision makers to make an informed decision? And this is a ministerial review that we conduct, although we do inform applicants often of what is the city policy and the likelihood of success or lack of success for a particular project. We may even suggest changes to an application to make it be more successful, more likely that it either gets adopted or that it can be understood. And eventually, at some point, when it's completed, and that includes also an environmental review, we certify as an agency, it's a ministerial action, meaning there is no discretion here, right? Either the application is complete or not. We certify that it is complete. And it begins this ULURP process, Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, and we often present it to the City Planning Commission to give them a first chance to see this is what's starting the public process, and what are your first questions and reactions to it, although it's just starting the public process. And the first step here is the community boards. They get 60 days, almost 2 months, to hold a public hearing and to issue recommendations. And it's recommendations, they're advisory, but they're important because community boards how they rationalize their decisions matters. The City Planning Commission, the Borough, other entities listen and read what community boards have to say, even though their voices are only, cannot be final, it's still an important voice. Then there are the borough presidents. Each borough president gets a chance for something within their district to hold a public hearing and to also issue an advisory opinion. And then it's up to the City Planning Commission. That's the first time that actually a project can be approved, it can be changed, or it can be actually turned down. Right? So the commission actually has that power, and it has to do so within 60 days and only after holding a public hearing. And if the commission votes to approve something or votes to approve something and make changes to it, it goes on to the city council, where they have 50 days to hold a public hearing and to either adopt the City Planning Commission's report on the application or to make changes to it. If there are changes, then they're, again, reviewed. And the final review is by the mayor. Theoretically, the mayor, no, practically, the mayor can invoke a veto. If there is something that the mayor does not like, that his City Planning Commission and the City Council passed, it is possible for the mayor to invoke a veto. That has, in my experience, actually never happened because, again, the mayor does control a majority of the City Planning Commission, and it's unlikely, for the most part, for the City Planning Commission to approve something that the mayor was not supportive of. So what are the takeaways of this ULURP? The positives are that it's a predictive process, that you know either as an applicant or as a community resident that there's a given timeline, right? That if an application has been certified, you know there's going to be a public hearing at the community board. You know there's going to be a public hearing at the City Planning Commission and at the City Council. You know that there is a timeline at which, the end of which, there is going to be a decision. So it doesn't just, as it used to before, without a timeline, sort of, you know, okay, fine, we'll hold this over, we'll just forget about, you know, and then all of a sudden we'll take it up for a vote again. I'm sorry we didn't realize that it was happening. So it's predictive. It allows for changes to projects in response to public reaction. So oftentimes applicants will say, we know that you think, you disagree to us, right, that this application has full merit, but we'd like it to take it through the public process and hear from the public, and then we'll make changes, right, so that we can hear what is it that people want. And often people make good recommendations, and applicants will welcome those recommendations, and other times they will not. There are numerous venues here for citizens to participate in. And the great thing about community boards is, in comparison to other places around the world, is that it creates citizen planners. It creates a cadre, a group of people who are familiar with land use, familiar with zoning, familiar with the process, who can make better informed decisions. The challenges to ULURP are there is only a limited scope for changes. You can only change things in the application between what we say usually between existing and proposed. So you can't exceed it either up or down. If you're you can build 5 stories and you're asking for 10, you can change between 5 and 10, but you can't change above 10 or below 5. And sometimes that scope becomes very difficult for someone to respond if they want to vary something in application. So it's a very narrow possible change. Sometimes louder voices get overrepresented. People who feel very strongly about an issue but who may not be in the majority on that issue can overpower the process and overcompensate for their limited power. And then oftentimes it's individual proposals that are reviewed rather than a larger citywide issue. So it's incremental changes rather than a larger discussion of a larger issue at hand. So ULURP has been successful as a public input tool, as process. And in fact, during the administration, the previous administration of Mayor Michael Bloomberg, our agency, together with community groups, at the request of community groups and elected officials, conducted over 120 rezonings. That we took them through this public review process that I just described between 2002 and 2013. It's over 11,000 city blocks. It's more than we ever changed in area and zoning in the 40 years prior. And we generally, these rezonings were balanced between what we call down zoning, where you allow less density in an area in order to prevent people from building taller buildings or larger buildings or different kinds of buildings, and where you can go up, right? And we had discussions, negotiations with communities. If we put in height limits, low height limits on the side streets, you got to allow some growth to occur on the major streets in exchange for that. That's how we call them balanced. The drawback was that these rezonings were really marginal. The upzonings were really very little, considering that we're a growing city, and didn't really resolve many of the larger issues about housing and economic development. And they certainly weren't matched with infrastructure investments in most cases, and were reactive to growth rather than anticipatory. Usually communities came to us and said, we don't like that tall building being built, you got to change the zoning. Right? It wasn't, let's prevent tall buildings from being built, or let's allow for taller buildings. It was more the opposite. And so when Mayor de Blasio came into office, he recognized that you needed to go beyond this this Euler process. You needed to, if you will, front load it. You needed to build the public consensus building ahead of time, or at least you should do so. And one of his key initiatives is affordable housing and addressing the affordable housing crisis and the need to grow our city to allow for more affordable housing. And in order to do so, that requires a planning process with participation by communities. There needs to be a discussion. If for the past 12 years we were talking only with communities about downzoning and sort of closing our eyes or putting our heads in the sand about the fact that our population was growing, then we needed to have a larger discussion with that community. And he also said that we should have commensurate capital investments, so that if we're going to have growth, if a community accepts growth, there has to be infrastructure and investment in order to respond to that, say schools or parks or things like that. So I want to give you an example of something that we're working on right now, an active project, as part of the mayor's housing plan, and it's called the East New York Community Plan. And Housing New York is in response to the fact that we have a housing crisis in New York City. Unlike Singapore, which is fortunate to have a very successful public housing program, New York City also has, for the United States, a very successful housing program, but it is insufficient to meet the demand of our growing population. So we have record population growth, we have a strong economy, and we have a good quality of life. We're basically victims of our own success. This has resulted in significant rent increases, and without commensurate salary increases has meant that the number of rent-burdened households in our city has increased dramatically. And it's also meant that as rents rise, they no longer are subject to rent regulation, and there's a loss in affordable housing in that way. So Housing New York is about producing and preserving 200,000 units of affordable housing, low-cost housing. It's a total of over $6.5 billion, 120,000 units to be preserved, 80,000 to be newly built, and in addition to that, 160,000 so-called market rate units, basically, what other people refer to as luxury housing, but regular housing that's not subsidized. And the idea here is to do neighborhood planning to foster thriving, inclusive neighborhoods, improve and preserve the affordability of existing housing, to build new housing, and to better serve populations great at risk like the homeless and seniors. And we are actually at a record number of homeless in our city at 60,000. So there's 15 neighborhood plans. Most of them will be led by our agency or are led by our agency, the Department of City Planning, but other agencies may also step in and lead one of those plans. And every single capital and service agency is involved. This is what I've learned from Singapore, not unusual for your city, for your state, but for us to have all agencies be involved in the planning for every single community plan that we're doing is unusual. We used to do it under Mayor Bloomberg for particular economic initiatives, but we never did it for community initiatives. This is different. This is really turning it the other way around. We're directing, the mayor has directed all city agencies to work cooperatively with communities for their benefit. The neighborhood plans are to be matched by a special investment fund set aside specifically for capital improvements to accommodate the additional growth. And examples of that are parks, community centers, and street improvements. And then key to this is intensive community participation to build consensus on future vision for the area that we're working with this community with. There are currently 6 such plans throughout New York City, 1 in each borough, 2 in Queens. And the first plan is in Brooklyn, in East New York. And it was chosen because there was a previous planning effort taking place here. There's good transit. The zoning is very low, and therefore really has not been updated in over 50 years. And it's as I'll explain in a second, it's a low-income community that actually could use more low-cost housing. So East New York is located in the eastern part of Brooklyn. As you can see by the train lines indicated here, it is highly transit accessible, which is special and good for this area. It's characterized by major avenues. Sorry that this is blinking back and forth. Okay, now it's, okay. Should we just go on? So there are 4 major avenues. Whoops. Anyway, there are 4 major avenues. On my screen, it looks normal. Therefore, it must be. Okay, so I'll just keep talking. There are 3 major. We've lost it completely. There we go. Okay, so there are major transit corridors and shopping corridors, as well as side streets that are stable. As I mentioned, it has good transit access. It's a population that is predominantly minority meaning African American or Black, and Hispanic, with some Asian. But significantly more than, or almost half, are below the poverty line, and only 11% of adults living in this community have college degrees. And actually, Alex, again, started working in our office working on this particular neighborhood. So we started out with a federal grant here several years ago, 4 years ago, where we held community meetings, we conducted outreach events, visioning forums, including walking tours. We worked with the community board, elected officials. We had an advisory committee, and the purpose was to come up with a vision for this community. And this is not new to anyone, but people wanted more housing options, especially affordable housing. They wanted better stores and services. They wanted transit access to be safer and easier. They wanted jobs in their community, and they also wanted to improve the sustainability of this community. And we came up, based upon those principles, with a planning framework and published that in 2014. And it was this planning framework that then that Mayor de Blasio, as he was taking office, took on and said that this should be the first neighborhood as part of Housing New York to be treated as a neighborhood plan. And so we redoubled our efforts and went back out to the community to re-engage and now implement and try and work on implementation of this planning framework. We started out with a visioning kickoff in September of last year, where we had breakout sessions, we had report backs, and we listed priorities that we wrote down. Okay. There we go. We had more visioning sessions with theme-based workshops on things like streetscape, on economic development, and on housing. We had particular community planning, meaning what should your community look like, urban design workshops in these separate communities. And we had one on community resources and housing, report backs, where agencies actually reported back to the community. You told us this, here's what we are responding, here's what we can offer you in return. And so this is what we heard yet again. People wanted affordable housing. They wanted housing for seniors. They wanted to preserve the character of their neighborhood. And they wanted to protect low-cost housing. They also, for economic development, wanted career training programs, opportunities for local residents, and more stores. They wanted a safer Atlantic Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare of this community, at 8 lanes. They wanted also more pedestrian-friendly streets. And finally, they wanted a community center, and they wanted improvements to existing parks. And we broke that up into 4 different areas and presented our plan both at an all-agency presentation, that is, commissioners from every single agency that participated in the planning came out to the community to present themselves, their portion of the plan. And we had a town hall just in July, this past summer, where we presented updates to the plan. We started the public review process for this in September of this year, so just 2.5 months ago, and we're in the midst of it. The borough president, now they know all about ULURP, the borough president is now reviewing it, and the City Planning Commission will hold its public hearing in early January. You're all invited. And so I'll just quickly go through. These are the components of this plan. For housing, the main part of it, of course, is to work to preserve the existing low-cost housing that exists in the community through various programs, to further the construction of new affordable housing. Our housing agency is committed to subsidizing affordable housing, that when the zoning allows for higher density in this community, and the developer came to the city to ask for financial help, that it would be given, and it would be given for the entire building. And that there are 1,200 units already in the planning stages in order to do this. We also work with our Small Business Services Department, our Economic Development Department, to locate a training center in the community to help programs to help existing businesses, as well as help train people on how to better grow their businesses along the retail corridors. Our transportation department has grown a $1 million grant that it got from an elected official to over $30 million to transform the major thoroughfare of this community, Atlantic Avenue, with a landscape medium to make it a safer street. And our agency has committed another $8 million to that to improve the sidewalks and put in benches and trees and bus shelters. The mayor committed to build a new school here in East New York. Again, this is different from other initiatives in previous administrations where these investments came, either they didn't come along with the rezoning or they came after the fact and were not previously committed to, plus improvements to certain parks. And then this is our vision, when in between blackouts, for East New York, unfortunately. Okay. No. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's continue. So, but not all is rosy about our plan. During the process that we were doing the workshops and the visioning and the report backs and all that, people got a little taken aback by this process. And talk about it in a moment, but maybe it was the scale of it. And so there are several community groups that actually banded together to form a coalition to advocate for what they thought were differences, improvements, changes to our plan. And we've been meeting with that group, or had been meeting with that group, to try and incorporate as much of the changes as we could that met our policies, but there are differences still remaining. And then there is, I think overall the reaction is, in general, is that among New Yorkers, because of population growth, because of the rise in rents, there's a fear of displacement from higher rents, right? We call it, or you may have heard the term, gentrification. It is people who are wealthier moving into a neighborhood, driving up rents, driving up prices. And in fact, you know, I like to argue that it is people who are being priced out of another neighborhood, moving to a lower cost neighborhood, who are then driving other people out. And so it's not every perpetrator of gentrification is only that. Oftentimes they're victims themselves of gentrification in the neighborhood they just came from, right? So many in the community also doubt that the new housing would be affordable to them or their neighbors. They have an unease about who those new residents would be from outside the community. I mentioned that 90% of the residents of this community are either Hispanic or black. And many of the newer residents, they fear, wealthier residents, happen to be white. There's also skepticism about the city's commitments. Is the city real? Is the city serious about the affordable housing, about the job training, about the park improvements? And then there's concern about an ulterior motive. What are you trying to do? What are you not telling us? You know, what's in there that's a little shady? You know, so there's a great deal of distrust. And so as a result, both community boards that this plan affected voted no against our plan, despite the fact that we've been in contact, in touch with them, working with them for the past 4 years. They included conditions for their no. They say they wanted to have lower income levels for the affordable housing. They wanted to have a higher percentage of affordable units. They wanted a community center, which we have yet to be able to provide. They wanted to see more economic development for local businesses because they're concerned that they would be displaced as well. And they wanted a college in their neighborhood to help them with educational attainment. So the lessons that we are learning from this is that I think we wish that we had more time, right? It's hard when there is a housing crisis, when there are 60,000 individuals, half of them are families with children, in homeless shelters, in very poor conditions, waiting for housing, when there are 200,000 names on the waiting list for our own public housing, when there are thousands of applications for every single affordable housing unit that our city is able to provide. It is hard to say, okay, let's wait. Let's wait another 6 months. Let's wait another year. The other issue here, the other lesson to be learned is a dialogue about change. You know, having a conversation with the community about what is change, what should be changed, the need for action, why do we need to do something, the limits on the solution. For example, no, you can't get a college here, unfortunately. And the fact that we have population growth and and that's not necessarily a bad thing to have a city that's growing because it means that you get services. And also that we need more community buy-in, meaning we need a community that's vested in actually advocating for these plans. So the other lessons, though, that we've learned, that the positive takeaways are that there is now an improved and increased community participation. Despite the fact that the community boards voted no, they are aware of what is going on. They fully know, right? And in fact, many tell us they're not really opposed to what we're doing, but they're sending a message to the mayor and basically the elected officials at large to say, we need your help, and we don't know any other way to express it but to vote no on this, right? Because we want you to think globally and large here. We are doing comprehensive planning, which is important with our partner agencies. We're doing interagency coordination. We're upfront paying for infrastructure. We've committed to making these changes if the zoning changes go through. We're beginning a conversation with communities about their future, and other communities are noticing throughout the city. We have a great invigorated staff. People in my office throughout our agency love to work on these plans because that's what they went to planning school for, is to work with communities, to discuss issues with them and find solutions. And we think that it results in better planning. And I want to end with this quote by the civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who said about consensus that ultimately a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but is a molder of consensus. So there's a role for us as planners and civic leaders, not just to sit idly by or to listen, but to actually actively engage populations and to inform, to teach, to discuss, to debate, and to direct the conversation in a direction that results in positive change. And we are grateful to the fact that we have a mayor and a director of our agency who's willing to take this task on. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Winston, for the very insightful sharing. I would now like to invite our panelists, Mr. Alex Sommer and Mr. Liang Wei-Xin, and our moderator, Mr. William Lau, to join us on stage for the moderated discussion and Q&A. Ladies and gentlemen, during the Q&A session, we ask that you please state your name and organization before you ask any question or make any comments. You may raise your hand and our staff will walk over to you with our microphones. Thank you. I will now hand the time over to Mr. William Lau.
Thank you very much, Winston. Keen, where are you, Keen? We need to load in the latest PowerPoint. I'll give him a little chance. I think there's some mixed up in the slides. Take a look at it. I think one of them is broken into two parts, and the numberings are not quite correct. But so when Keen, my assistant, is trying to do a little change, let me kick off. Perhaps I should say that when I first met Winston, 3-4 months ago, yes, in a international planning conference, when I heard about New York City, I have the imagery of all the Wall Street tall high-rise building. But when he talks to me, I get a little bit confused because you must understand New York City has 5 boroughs. And how do they relate and where you are from? Perhaps that part, like me, I think many of the audience may not be clear. Can you take a moment to tell us where Brooklyn is and how you're related to the New York City that we often associate, which is the Wall Street, Manhattan, and also the Central Park?
Sure. So as I mentioned, New York City has 5 boroughs. The most famous one is Manhattan, and that's obviously where Wall Street and Midtown Manhattan and the Empire State Building is. But there are actually a majority of New Yorkers live in what we call the boroughs outside of Manhattan, in places like Brooklyn or Staten Island and Queens and the Bronx. And in fact, most of those places are not dense and not tall. And the majority of New Yorkers actually live in small buildings, like in East New York, of 2 to 3 to 6 stories. There are high-rises in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is the largest in terms of population. We have over 2.5 million people, and we're growing. In fact, we're growing faster than the rest of the city is, except for Queens. And it's a very diverse population of many Asian Americans, very growing segment, as well as Hispanics from Central America and South America and Mexico and the Dominican Republic, as well as whites from all walks of life.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I try to localize a little bit so our people can understand better. New York City, that most of us, I believe many of you think like me, that we are talking about Manhattan, which is a very long island, which is our downtown, CBD. Lower part is the Wall Street, and the upper part, New York, around the Central Park. So your equivalent would be perhaps Kallang. Yes, the Kallang across the river. Fair enough?
Except, you know, Alex and I work on a part of Brooklyn that's called Downtown Brooklyn, which also is more like your downtown.
Okay, so at the fringe of the downtown, but across a river. And the most famous bridges out is actually Brooklyn Bridge, which has a lot of nostalgic and interest and the most, I think, most prominent bridge, right? So, okay, for this panel session, I have 5 questions, first of all, to funnel through, and we will try to do it expediently. No? Now it's misbehaving to Singaporean. Okay, we have about 45 minutes, so I have to not only handle them, I have to handle the time too. So 45 minutes, and I beg all of you, because when I first spoke to you, you are all very chatty gentlemen, and some of you can talk very long. So I beg of you to keep your answers short and pointed and direct. And as we talk, there are 2 mics in the audience. So some of you with burning desires to talk, you have to fight us to talk. Please fight us to talk. But we will try to move swiftly. I will not pay attention only to them. I will pay attention to you. If you want to speak, you just put up your hands. You have a chance to talk. For those people who are shy, this is your best moment for public speaking. So, and we want to also hear from as many people's view as possible, so that it's not just us bouncing around, but also interactive for you to come forward. Okay, my question number 1 is a New York planning review process. I hear you talk about planning committee, right? I scratch my head and I cannot understand, Winston, because here in Singapore, where we are, the URA next door decides everything for us. If in a household of Singaporean people, if we can equate it to a household, URA and MND is like the daddy and the mommy. Okay? That all of us are little children. Okay? Are you telling me in your country, daddy and mommy don't decide things, but you leave it to the children or a particular household? I understand out of the 13 members, many of them are actually non-government people. Is that right? In your planning process, the people who vote yes and no to a land use change is actually architects like me in private practice and real estate brokers. I think we have some real estate brokers, agents out here. You are the people who decide how the city shall be shaped. Please explain, one of you.
I'll start. Maybe I should talk about the planning commission, and then maybe you can talk about just citizens being involved as well, who have a very strong role and an effective role. But it's true that the planning commission in New York City is powerful in that it can vote down or up a proposal and make changes. It does consist of professionals, and they include real estate brokers, but also community advocates, community organizers. And so we hear it from both sides of the issues from the commission. But in general, I would say it is pleasant because the commission is generally broadly united behind a vision for a better New York. But it is not the only entity, and I'm going to give Alex an opportunity to talk about the important role that citizens play, either through community boards or individually, in the planning process.
So Winston mentioned that there's a more informal process that takes place in part of this public review. In New York City and other large cities in the U.S., there's a large local development corporation movement where it's nonprofits that are mission-driven that really take a close look at land use policy and land use decision-making processes. They train stakeholders and advocates in the communities, and they really put a spotlight on a lot of these issues that come up through the process. And they sit on sometimes the boards, the community planning boards. They're chairs, they're on the committees, but also times they don't have a formal role, and they can actually help inform and advise this process, good and bad. As Winston mentioned, you know, sometimes the city sets policy objectives and goals, and in the case, for example, East New York, advocates can kind of squash some of that policy making.
Alex, this is my mic with him. You have your mic. Okay. Thank you. Don't take over the house. Okay, you flash a ladder, 1 to 8, right? Just now I saw in your picture, ladder 1 be manipulative, and what? And then the top is citizen control. Where are you now, and where do you think? Next question I want to ask Lian, who is an architect turned developer. Where does he think Singapore is? So first is where is New York? Next is where Singapore is in that ladder. That's our mic, please.
You know, as you're asking me that question, originally, right, I would have said somewhere between, I think towards the top, right? Not citizen control. Citizens do not have control in New York. They certainly participate and sometimes are spoken to rather than being part of. But I would say it's a two-way street. I would say that it depends on the citizenry as much as they want to be involved, right? So if they want to be involved and they want to have a role, they can move themselves up the ladder. And if they don't, they can move themselves down the ladder and be spoken to.
I saw the chart, I took some notes there. At the bottom is non-participative, at the center is tokenism, at the top is citizen power. I think for Singapore, we certainly feel that there's a bit of tokenism, but it is moving very quickly towards partnership and consultation. You know, and you can see consultation growing at the industry level at the first cut. I mean, William and me sits in some of these URA, SIP, SIA radars. All the guidelines are sometimes browsed through together with all the industry players to see the implications and to get some buy-in. So I would say there's consultation. Do we have a vote? No. Do we have an influence? Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think fundamental difference is, again, back to the household. Papa and mother, it's a part of a growing pain, you see. When our children were young, when me and my wife, we had to decide everything for them, right? They don't know where to go, holiday, everything we plan for them, they just come along. But there was a certain, now our children, all of them are in late teens and early 20s. So they no longer behave the same. And they start to rebel and resist. They say, Daddy, I don't want to go here. Daddy, I have this program and that. So we begin to realize that we can no longer tell them what to do. They have already grown up, and it's time to listen to them. What would you like to do for the next holiday? And they are the ones who say, Daddy, you don't get trapped in the commercialization. Don't go for all the tourist attraction. Go down to the ground and see how the people live. And I'm waking up to a new chapter of my life to say, yeah, this is the time to turn over and we have a better family. Because we are actually planning for them and let them participate. And one fundamental difference, if I may to make a little correction or clarity, is that the people has the vote. In the 13 members, many of them are in private practice, they actually vote yes or no, while the committee that we are sitting in is like, I hear your view, but you have no voting rights, and whether I want to accept your opinion or not is up to the authorities' purview. So I think we must understand the fundamental difference. Okay, we move on to the next one. Oh, sorry, can I ask for help? I think this thing is not really obeying. City renewal and gentrification. I heard you saying that if a developer is interested in a development and you have not enough affordable housing, you give them incentives, right? We are familiar with plot ratio here. Okay, with a certain plot ratio, you can exceed the plot ratio by up to 35%. But, so you really enjoy is 10% extra floor area, but you must build 25% affordable housing. Can you explain this a little bit more?
So that is the previous administration, or a hybrid of the previous administration. You have to understand, in New York City, we had a seesaw election in 2013, and Mayor de Blasio considers him very different from Mayor Bloomberg. And so, yes, before, under Mayor Bloomberg, we had an incentive-based zoning where you were given a bonus in return for including affordable housing in your development. One of the things that Mayor de Blasio is currently proposing that's going through the public review process is actually not just an incentive, but it is saying that when you build housing in areas that are increased in zoning density, you not may include affordable housing, you must include affordable housing. So it's mandatory, and the minimum is 25%. It can be as high as 30% as a minimum permanently affordable. But it's only when the density is up. So there is no more bonus. It's that when you're going, I'm making up this number, if you're going from 5 to 8 stories, then you will be subject to this requirement. If you're currently at 5 stories and there is no requirement, there is no requirement.
We are now doing a London project which is very similar. We have a consented scheme. We wanted to intensify further. It's a 42-story residential and hotel. We want to intensify further. There was we had needs to negotiate the City of London for affordable housing, and we have to prove that while we intensify, they want to levy on us more affordable housing charges, and we have to get our surveyor to show our case, and there's a bit of lobbying. And of course, at the same time, when you're doing that, we throw in what we call value add. You know, we express to them what we're going to do with the public realm. You know, there's a bit of so-called bargaining here and there. And I found that such practices does do some thinking, and we package things and we try to improve public realm. We talk about, while we are intensifying, how do we do service management so we don't clutter up the roads and so on and so forth. So we do a lot of preemptive planning and showcase that we thought through all the processes. You know, Singapore, when it comes to gentrification and plot ratio increase is such a taboo word. You hardly get plot ratio. My thinking is this, that things doesn't need to be incentivized via just plot ratio increase. You know, certain things like relaxation of height does help, especially on a conserve a block of building in a plot of land. You need height so that we have less coverage, then we can preserve that building. You know, we can also, besides plot, we can also maybe ask URA or the authorities for more white space, means allow us to have more flexibility of use as a compensation for preserving a certain block of building. So I think there are many ways to skin the cat. So maybe we can start thinking of not just asking for more plot ratio intensification. We can ask for height limits. We can ask for more white space, more flexible use of spaces.
So you're talking about your experience as a company investing in London, first of all, and your involvement in the experience of doing affordable housing as part of your development. And this is also additional.
No, the first part, of course, is my London. I'm just thinking in Singapore, we don't have much gentrification project here, but there are cases in which we have to preserve. There are plots where maybe you like to preserve a certain building and you want to do it, but feasibility-wise, it may not be feasible. So you need to have some incentivification or value add to the feasibility. We are developer. We have to look at the final feasibility of the project. So what I'm trying to say is that there are many other ways to get around it, to get the incentivification, not just via plot ratio. Relaxation of height give us allow us to have to avoid knocking down a building and thereby have a new and old merged together. That will be all nice project to do, you know. We did the Grand Plaza in Singapore. We kept some of the old building. We have some new build. Those are the projects that really can do what we call very good placemaking. You know, it has got a mix of old and new.
Okay, Winston, I want to.
I just wanted to clarify
Sure.
on this that it's not just a bonus, a floor area bonus. That's one piece of a tool that the city uses. So on our end, we give floor area, but other city agencies provide low interest loans for construction and financing of a project. And they also give what's called tax credits, 421A for example. And so over the life of a 30 or 40 year life of a loan, among other kind of financial incentives. So it's a combination of floor area, tax incentives, low interest loans, and in combination, we achieve that.
So therefore, there are other incentive and goodies that comes along with providing the affordable housing in a commercial development. So very creative. Winston, why I tap on you, he's talking about one movement which was quite eminent in the last 10 years, which Singaporean we are all very familiar with, called en bloc sale, en bloc redevelopment. There is a bunch of old buildings with with lower plot ratio, but according to the new master plan, there is excess plot ratio, and they all face hammer, right? All the owners come together. There was a change of MCST ruling, allowing 80 or 90% of them to agree instead of 100%, and they can go for en bloc sale. And then many buildings were knocked down, right? Which in a way is very wasteful. But I do see one segment of leftover, unmarried. The real estate agents and developer will tell you they got stuck, right? Those people with a lot of differential, they got through. And, but those with marginal, they got stuck and they are quite ugly in Singapore. Perhaps we can slash the next slide. So there are some age development. And my suggestion is for this leftover stock, perhaps we can give incentive of 10 to 20, 15% additional GFA and plot ratio, so that they have a chance to make some revenues. The problem is they have no money in MCST and nobody wants to come up with all the money because we have a very high ownership. That's another thing we want to discuss compared to you. High ownership and very low rental. And so generate some income to go towards the building upgrading. And this is my list. This is not a gazetted list. This is my observation in case of doubt, so that there is no vested interest. That's why I think there's a mix up of slides. Can you move on to those areas? Sorry, mixing up of slides. We move on. That's the next question. Okay, I passed by this Golden Mile complex. When I go out to Singapore to speak, I say there is no slum housing. Then this morning I saw some slum housing. This bunch of people, they put all the awning out, and this Golden Mile complex was one of the highlight in the past years as one of the excellent architecture in town. But because they are stuck with the plot ratio and also stuck with the en bloc sale because they no longer can enjoy enhancement, and these are the people who are, to me, in my language, called in limbo. If we can get URA to grant them a little bit additional area, they will generate enough money to clean up the whole building. Next one. Tanglin Shopping Center has been on the newspaper for many times of unsuccessful en bloc sale. Again, because there is no enhancement plot ratio. Peninsula Plaza, Excelsior Hotel, even the shopping People's Park Complex. There is this band of building that got stuck, in my opinion, in city and gentrification. So I'd like to hear our Singapore developers' view of this thing, and also New Yorker. What do you think? Any other people, you're welcome to share your views.
I think when we talk about those leftover en bloc sale, you must put things in perspective. On one hand, the plot ratio increase, you will say may not be enough. On the other hand, sometimes it's the residences who wants to have too much money in the pocket in the en bloc sale. Thereby, for a developer, it doesn't add up in our feasibility study. Then for en bloc sale or non-en bloc sale, while en bloc sale is good to rejuvenate some of these old, underutilized, underplot sites, en bloc sale also have the other part of taking down iconic buildings, and we hope sometimes we don't lose some of those buildings. So we have to reckon with all those
One
things.
of the buildings I really miss is a building called Futura. Are you familiar with Futura by Timothy Sell? It was a beautiful building way ahead of time when he built it in the 70s, 80s, and kena the hammer. When I say kena the hammer, he got worried.
Kena means New Yorkers, means get whacked. Yeah.
So that's a beautiful building, but unfortunately get hammered. It would be nice if they restore it and build a little block beside it, and that would be a much better story. So now we move on to the next slide. But there are something already happening. This is a Pearl Bank apartment. There is a proposal, and it was in the newspaper I think a few months ago. Our dear friend, Mr. Tan Cheng Siong, I wanted him to be a panel speaker, but he is out of town. He is granted 15% increase of GFA to build. His proposal is to build another new 27-story residential block to replace the car park and the rooftop garden and amenities for them. And also because it was a URA sales of site to further extend, because the lease is running out, to extend into 99 years. So a flash of his proposal on the right-hand side. The new one is all skin in green. So I asked Cheng Siong, it's very beautifully green. How about the old building? Why don't you put some green too? Oh, he said, oh yeah, I forgot. But it's a remarkable architecture. Personally, I like it, and I would like to see this happening. I think he's making the first wave into this area, and I hope to see more of them happening. Can I have some view from the audience? Yes, I see one hand there. Can you rush the mic over and give us some opinion?
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from the Urban Redevelopment Authority. Thanks for a good talk. I just want to make a few comments on what has been said on the stage. Firstly, I think besides commenting on actual proposals of particular buildings, I don't think I will comment on that. But on a more philosophical point of view, right? We ask ourselves, what is the point, right, of planning, right? Or what's the point of public participation? Right? One of the big things that the role of the planner is playing is to manage the externalities, right? So if for a particular plot to be built to a certain height or to a certain number of dwelling units, it imposes an outcome on the surrounding community, which is quite possibly the developer wouldn't take into account. That's where the planner comes in, and that is also where the community comes in to tell the planner what are the priorities, right? What are the goods that are held in common by the community, which the community does not want to compromise on, right? So the role of the planner here is to mediate, right? To kind of on the one hand, to provide the technical know-how to the community, to enable the community to act collectively to preserve its own goods, its own common goods, right? So that the redistribution of goods among individual property owners or individual residents can be managed in an equitable way, right? So that's the role of the planner in this framework. And in Singapore too, it is like this, right? We may not have a ULEP process, we may not have an instituted process to ask for community input, right? But the name of the game is still the same. The planner takes care of the common good, makes sure that the benefits are distributed equitably to the best of our ability at this point, and make sure that externalities are accounted for.
Thank you, Daniel. So you're from URA?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Glad that there are some URA people down here. Any comments on what he says?
Yeah, I agree with large portions of that. I think there's a role of advocacy planning, which I think is what you're kind of referring to, and then there's more of the technocrat, which is translating community needs into legal documents, and community planning as a community planner. I think it's trying to walk that line, and I think that's correct. You know, starting with the public's input, sometimes they raise issues that, you know, we can't even comprehend or think of initially. And it's really valuable to have that in the process. And then I think part of the thing that we've been facing pretty recently is how can we be better advocates for broader policy goals where, is anybody familiar with the NIMBY term, not in my backyard? You know, right, so it's whose backyard then? And so it's trying to figure that out, and sometimes local needs shouldn't be overruled, shouldn't be overruled by the broader needs of the community, and it's balancing that, and I think as planners moving forward, I think we have to be better PR representatives of what we're trying to accomplish.
I think as developer, when you get a plot of land, we plan with the overall good of the neighborhood in mind. How we wouldn't develop something that will deteriorate the ambience or the value of the neighborhood. It affects us right deep into our feasibility. Unfortunately, in any development, there are aspects of the development, the front and the back. And the back could be your bin center, your PUB substation. Those are the ugly part. Nobody likes to be near to their home. So when we start to consult the public, they all come from a very, very selfish angle, not from the neighborhood angle. They just don't want it in front of their house. They don't mind it on somebody else's house. How do we mitigate that? If we start to have to consult each and everyone and listen to each and everyone, it gets into a very protracted argument or process. It costs money. So I think there should be a balance, yeah? Unless as a developer, we start to do nonsensical stuff, which we don't. You know? There are also steps that already been made to prevent this thing. I went through this process called long slab block guideline with URA. I thought it was a good exercise. It was something to make sure there's some guideline that you don't build a block that's so long that it blocks everybody else's view, especially there's a very good view right in front. You don't get so greedy and you have a block that blocks out everybody else behind you, and thereby you gain, the rest lose out. So there are some corridors or windows. So I think if we all sit together and consult and we just understand this issue is for common good, we set out some guideline, we understand what it is, and in so doing, everybody follow that guideline. You know, of course, there will be some waivers here and there if there's just borderline cases. I think these are the approach that we want to have. You know, so that's why I said just now, where were we? We are at the point in which we are consultative. We want to have that partnership. But at the same time, we are also asking for not all sites are the same. There will be sites with very unique constraints. Don't impose things that are so rigid on us that we can't move And unless, perhaps where we can show value add, then we should have some dialogue and be able to improve on the scheme, you know. The other thing I want to say is sometimes when we do all this consultative move and dialogue with the authorities is that there is always a concern of setting precedents. There is really a concern that gets everybody very paranoid. Nobody wants to give the first go ahead on something that is out of the norm. But sometimes to be innovative is to be getting ourselves out of precedence, especially if the precedence is not of great disadvantage. In fact, it's of value add to the neighborhood or the precinct. Then that precedent should have been set and will not be knocked down just because we do not want to set a precedent.
I just want to say this. I commend you for your understanding of what a planner is supposed to do and does. I think that was a wonderful way of someone who really understands community planning. I would add to that you know, the planners have different roles. Sometimes planners advocate on behalf of developers. Sometimes planners advocate on behalf of a community, and sometimes planners advocate on behalf of a government or the larger administration. And I think, you know, Alex and I are, you know, I have a little bit more experience now in Singapore, having met your colleagues at URA and HDB, and you know, we're somewhat envious and in awe of the power of URA. Sorry, William. For what they're able to do. The pendulum certainly is is very far over here on the government side, and both of us here working for the government would love to have that kind of power. But we also believe, just like you, by the way, that communities are important and need to be listened to. But I think both of us are thinking, not to put words in Alex's mouth, but certainly in mine, that there is a limit, there has to be a balance between what a community wants, the NIMBY, not in my backyard, and what the larger community needs are.
Thank you, Mr.
Quick one, I thought it's good to cite one good example. We did the Botanic at Bartley. There was some consultation with the neighboring group of people, and they came out. Of course, they don't want this to be blocked, that to be blocked. And one of the main things they highlight to us is the traffic congestion that can occur if you put another 797 unit into this precinct. So they asked that the egress of the development be split to 2 egresses, if I remember correctly. That was a positive thing. URA picked it up very quickly, went to LTA. LTA gave us based on 2 egress. Imagine that is helpful to us, that is helpful to the community. So sometimes taking in feedback, yes, is something where this is the planning guideline, this is how the developer design in accordance with the planning guideline. The community at touch who is on the ground know that something is not going to be very pleasant if this 797 unit gets TOP'd. So they feedback, everybody takes notice of it, yes, it's true, let's act on it, let's move and change things. You know? So such consultations can be useful. It's not always not in my backyard syndrome all the time.
Thank you.
Nagel, if I could ask one more question though. Recently in New York, I saw a very interesting development in participatory planning, which is participatory budgeting actually, in one of the community boards in Brooklyn actually. And I happened to be in town at the time. I went down to have a look at their outreach and their voting mechanism, and it's fantastic, right? The basic idea of it is that you don't just give people a vote on what to do. You actually give them a bunch of money, like $1 million, and then people vote on how to spend the $1 million on different projects that the community may want. I wanted to ask if you were familiar with this, and if you were involved in it, and what are your thoughts about how participatory budgeting may be used in improving neighborhoods?
No, it's a great process, and it's, you know, like democracy in general, the downside is that those most vocal end up pushing the agenda. So for one example, you know, as Winston was talking about, we have a huge affordable housing crisis. One of the participatory budgeting outcomes was funding for a dog park. And it's because there was a vocal dog park community that got involved, and then they had enough votes to shift that to a dog park instead of a library or park or any. And I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other, but it's a great process. But again, voting comes down to having the time, money, and education to participate, and sometimes that leads to people not always having a voice in that.
Okay, 2 quick comments. We need to move on. Lian, we were in the same committee of the slab block, blocking people's view because you take over the entire view. In your development, especially, is very long and it faces the ocean. You can find that in the newspaper and the publicity. Some years ago, there was one building in town I will not mention, but it did that. So when we're in the committee, it was very surprising that URA planner were presenting, right? And our side, we were responding. To the surprise of everybody, URA was much more relaxed. People of URA was much more relaxed, and they said, never mind. And we are the one who say, oh no, it's terrible. Let's make sure there are more openings, more windows of view, right? And so at the end, it was a very clever conclusion that I thought URA came up with. So therefore, the guideline became from URA position to independent expert, the other side, and the public and developer can move within this band. So I thought that was a very happy partnership, and we ended up, instead of just one line or the other line, a band of possibility. So that was a very good happening. So sometimes don't think that if you turn the power over to people, you lose it. They will turn around and tell you we need more tightening. But anyway, I think we have a business deal. I will get you a job in URA. You want power? And I love to listen to people, and I will take over your job, become a government servant in New York City. Okay. Deal? Deal. Bye-bye, Singapore. My wife will come along with me, of course. Okay. No, she is mine. Excuse me. Sorry, we move on. Sorry, I have no time to entertain the audience at this moment. So question number 3, because I'm setting aside time for you later on. New York City, I heard you. You treat your industrial use differently from us. Why do I say that? And just now in my office, finally I extract out this viewpoint, and you call TAMI. Can you explain, Alex, about TAMI?
Sure. So New York City, like a lot of older industrial cities, has gone through kind of like an economic shift as our industrial factory manufacturing jobs first went to the southern United States and then abroad. We lost a huge sector of our economy. And it wasn't until relatively recently that large commercial development is starting to come back to the city. And it's a good and a bad thing. We have large amounts of industrially zoned land and large amounts of industrial use land. A lot of it's polluted. A lot of it has really cool buildings, like industrial loft buildings, which create unique spaces for a lot of new creative commercial tenants that want to be there and move in and renovate these spaces. They're the less polluting, right? And you're bringing investment back to some neighborhoods. And so this is kind of a common acronym that we've been trying to categorize and try to wrap our head around some of these new sectors. And TAMI, the technology, arts, media, innovation sectors are some of those that are starting to kind of explode in New York City.
Okay, so you want to speak?
I think some of the adaptive reuse building are the most sexy and most chic building. especially when it comes to hospitality. You go to Milan, you go to other cities, some of this, Singapore, perhaps some of this change of use could, of course, we always want to maximize plot ratio, intensify because of our scarce land that we are having in Singapore, but these are definitely things we should consider, preserve some of those so-called warehouse enclave and then rejuvenate. But we have our own Dempsey, we have our own, which is also very successful.
Clarke Quay.
Clarke Quay, But when it comes to mixed use in the industrial, when I saw this question, I was reading in another way, thinking that you will allow end user to go into industrial space and use it as office. That to me is quite a different thing altogether. In developer, we like flexibility, but sometimes we don't like flexibility. Imagine me buying an office plot of land, building it at a high expense on land price based on office use, and my neighbor use it industrial building and the agency allow them to use it as office. Can you imagine the substitution threat I'm facing? I have to charge $8, he can charge $5 and get away with it. So why do I pay for that kind of land price and then get so-called cheap competition around me? So yes, so I thought that question was angling on that. There must be some clarity of what is the land use, what is the land supply demand, what is the use you're going to use in the neighborhood. We are quite good at that in Singapore. We have all this clarity, which is good. We like it, But there are areas in which we can do adaptive reuse. I like it too, But that is from the angle of creating great places in Singapore, like our Dempsey.
Okay, so he is speaking as a developer.
Chili crab there is quite nice.
And you think the competition is not fair. Do I hear you saying that? Because you say that you bid expensively for a land, for commercial and office building, and then people go to the cheaper industry and use the building at a lower rental, and you are not happy, right? You are saying that it's not equitable. But in New York City, the thinking is very different. And also perhaps the dynamics is different too, because you're outside New York City, the distance is different. You are at a suburb, but only 15 minutes away, very near. So I think you want to talk.
I just wanted to clarify, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily know the same kind of market framework in Singapore, but in New York, residential is the highest value use.
Same here too.
Okay,
yes,
so
and commercial.
So it's commercial is residential's through the ceiling, commercial's here, and industrial uses.
Here we have two up the ceiling.
Okay.
Both are in the ceiling.
So our industrial zone land, you can do anything basically except residential.
That's interesting, you see. Can you say that again?
There's caveats to that, but in general, our industrial zone
land. A lot
land,
more flexibility for things because it's industry.
It's zoned for that type of use. Yeah.
That's interesting. It baffles me. I cannot understand, but it seems like something quite wonderful. Perhaps we can rethink.
I want to put in a little caution, right? Our manufacturing zoning was created in 1961 and therefore was developed in the 1950s to a very different standard. And so even though we have flexibility in our industrial zoning, which allows you to convert existing buildings to different uses that are permitted by that zoning, the zoning is so outdated that if you want to build new buildings under that zoning, even though the uses are flexible, some of the requirements, especially for parking, are so outdated that they make it impossible to develop. And that's one of the other reasons why our industrial areas do not get redeveloped or get redeveloped with the wrong uses, or some people think the wrong uses, such as self-storage. We have mini storage where people store their stuff in, which is not very intensive, or people take issue with hotels in industrial zones that are where the parking can be either less or it is so profitable that they don't mind providing the exceptional parking in order to build that building.
The space usage is changing so rapidly. Retail, they say maybe nowadays you go Korea, you can do your supermarket shopping on the wall. You just apps on it, and then you can buy your fish, you can buy your whatever. So you need a wall space, and then the rest is sent from the warehouse to your home. So what I'm trying to say is that when you do planning, certain things change, and things are going to change even more rapidly. Not just retail, office. So I personally would like to see land plots being given. We tried Whiteside, but Whiteside is so wide, so flexible that you don't know what the developer who bought it will build. He maybe built a big temple, and you don't like it, But let's have some usage fixed, and let's have a certain percentage of whiteness in there. That will be very nice, because 99 years, we have 99 years here land. 99 years is a long time, and I don't want to be fixated with office only, or 60% office, 40% retail, fixed. Maybe give that 20% of flexibility, because we got to evolve with time. Other than that, the building will become obsolete. Then you look at the tender condition, you say that, no, you can't change, because when you bought it 84 years ago, it was on a 60-40, but now you can't do anything. We have to go by the rule. You bought it at that time, at that price, is on that. So a certain element of whiteness. I don't think all full white side is really that good.
Whiteness, you mean flexibility?
Flexibility. No, undefined use. You can buy it, you can build an office, you can build a hotel, you can build a service apartment.
And you can change the use over time.
Throughout the years.
Interesting.
But perhaps a certain level of whiteness in it will be nice. That's my thought.
Okay, we have no time, so we move on. I'm going to flash to you. I won't talk much about it. The next few slides is Singapore, how we handle this. By the way, we call our industry now Business 1 and Business 2, but there is a cap. Like what Lian says, 60% still need to be main, clean, and light industry. Computer, software, distribution is still very, very industry-based. And then 40% can be ancillary use, so there is a bit of flexibility there, but the percentage is heavily capped. And generally, it's still very industrial and operation, production-based. There is no larger retail use, and discotheque, etc. I don't think we can put in our industry. Churches also cannot go into the industry. This is what's happening now. We move on. Then there is a white, by the way. Business 1, white, B1 use plus white. So there is a provision. So you can go and bid for this land. I think you will like it. Okay? And then B1 and B2 are still the same. But you must achieve a plot ratio minimum of 2.5, and the balance you can use it. So in other words, you can have retail shops, etc. The normal ones, and on top you plunk on industrial B1 and B2. There is a provision already in our master plan. But still, there's a cap over there, so we move on. Then there is also business park and business park wide side. So we do have a few permutations in place, but it's very different from your definition. Okay, we have seen this one. Okay, now question number 4. This one is I hear people say, okay, that Singapore private developments, the question is, do Singapore private development enjoy similar planning provision, missing is, as compared to government land? So my colleagues tells me that some of the private development are next to the state land. And it appears like the state land can build very, very tall and very high density. And I'm straddled in between. I am being suppressed and I cannot grow. So I hear nods here, I hear nods there. So is this a good thing? Should there be a distinction between private land and public land or not? Oh yes, I see. Is it Daniel wanting to speak?
William, I can't. It's not true. It's just not true. You could go to the next question. This is just not true.
Daniel, I can bring to you 5 cases in my hands now, but it's not good to say it here. That is true. Many of them are not my case, but other developers' case. Perhaps we can take it up privately following this forum. Okay, and there is also a difference. There's a typo error. Huh? Private land here, Singapore, private land, now we have 20%. In the past, state land from British colonization government owns 20%. But over the years, due to massive land acquisition, Singapore government therefore own not 20, but 80%. And the 20% of the land are mostly in old downtown area and nearby suburb, like Siglap, like Serangoon, etc. And the government land are in the Marina Bay reclamation area and regional town, which is Punggol, Jurong East, etc. So my observation is this 20% land, generally, Daniel, I see that very clearly. I can point out to you which this plot, that plot, and some of them I have no vested interest. Purely as a planner, that plot ratio is lagging behind, and planning guidelines and parameters are not being matching. Perhaps we can talk separately, and any other people, you can send emails to me. We bundle them all together. Let's go and see URA together. Okay, we move on. You want to say, yes?
I've never heard that before.
I must not tell you everything in our friendship. I must always give you new surprises. Yeah. We have been dialoguing a lot, through Skype in the middle of the night. Yes.
I thought it's better to put things in perspective. I personally don't think there's a case whereby an agency look at a plot and this is private, so it's plot ratio 3. This is government land, is plot ratio 5. There are cases of plot ratio lagging behind. Thereby, I am in United Square. I think my plot ratio is 3. I bought a piece of land across in Novena Square, is 4.2. Of course, we go to URA and say, hey, can you give us upgrade of 4.2? The question asked is then, if there's an overall master plan review, and yours happen to be selected to be upgraded, well, fine, you got it. But perhaps, why are we asking for more? And definitely we see more demand in the area, and we're quite prepared to tear down a whole building and rebuild it to 4.2. But definitely no one want to give one particular developer a windfall. And what about the next? And what about the next? That is obvious. It is obvious. But perhaps there could be some mechanism beyond charging DC or to raise the plot ratio, because you can put out a case that intensification can be supported in front of infrastructure, blah, 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 and it's good for that optimization of our land scarce precinct. So then you pay effectively the full price. And if the developer says, yes, I'm willing to take it on, after all, my building is already 40 years old, I'm about to do a big CapEx, I myself tear it down, build a new building, it's freehold status anyway, then you pay the full price. And if we are prepared, why not? You rejuvenate, So I personally don't believe that this is a government land, this is a private land. This one, okay, is 3, this is 4.2. There's no such intention, but there should be allowance for developer to put up a case to intensify and pay for it, So likewise in London, I have a 42-story building, hotel office. I go for intensification, and intensification there, they are very strict. The envelope cannot move. We got right or line of sight. We're all there. We are all encumbered. But we say that we want to, instead of producing 120 apartments, we are quite prepared to do 100. We can do 160 instead of 200 room hotel. I can do 280, for instance, because it was originally consented on a 4-season scheme. Now it's a Pan Pacific hotel scheme. Different brand, different need. They listen to us, they allow us to do the intensification, they ask you to submit. Does that have impact on your affordable housing computation? We say no, they say yes, we put our case, in the end, we came to an agreement. So that kind of intensification, and we show, and at the point when we show and submit to the authority, of course, we want to put the best case forward. We start to rope in public realm, everything, and we put up a compelling case to the planner. And the planner look at it from the more helicopter view and say that this is indeed good. For instance, we don't have car park. They are very worried about us putting a lot of car park. Instead, we put a big ballroom in the basement, and we are quite prepared. No car park, but big ballroom. And in the City of London, they say they are in dire need of a good ballroom for whatever, you know. And it's a good business case for me too. So I think it's a win-win. So such so-called flexibility to negotiate and participate is good for our city. You know, it brings about value add. It brings about higher ownership, and developer now see that they can also influence the whole precinct. You know, right now the influence, like I said earlier, is that we are being consulted from the industry. We sit in, be it cycling master plan, be it whatever. We give in our input. I believe you all take note of all our input. You think of it pros and cons. Of course, you also look at whether there was vested interest in there. You know, yeah, skepticism, fine, all this fine, but over time, you know, you'll know that people are contributing because they want this for the good of the city. And maybe they've seen something in other city they think they can contribute. I think such participation has to be lifted to a higher level. It draws upon higher ownership.
5 more minutes to
Thank
run.
you.
So I just wanted to say, I was being facetious by saying that I've never heard of this, because of course we hear this all the time as well in New York, that one property owner feels disadvantaged in some fashion by our zoning and by our planning. And so I want to defend the concept of, you know, a government planner. We look out for what we believe is the public interest. And so there are times when, you know, we look at plot ratios, and I do believe that most of the time we are unbiased, right? We make a decision based upon a larger goal. We have a greater scheme in mind than just one little one. Having said that, I totally get the part that, and developers come to us frequently, property owners come to us frequently and say, you know, this is different. Here's what I want to do. This is what I've noticed about this. And here's how I want to change it. And it's a process. It takes time, right? It takes time persuading us, giving us the information, telling us why this makes sense, how this fits in, why is this better. And quite frankly, also because we have this public review process where other parties are involved, we tell people, okay, you've convinced us, so you may be convincing us, but you need to also convince some others, not just us. Right? So I think the benefit of public participation is larger.
Sorry, I've only 5 minutes. I think now only 3 minutes. Thank you very much. So I hear you that in London is much more flexible, and you seem to be happy, yes, about it. Sorry, I have no time to...
One quick comment. I think it's pros and cons. Singapore has a great system. Public comment for... responding to public comment for the good of the city, the good of precinct, and agency responding to it is well and fine. I'm a advocate of a positive mindset. But at the same time, sometimes the concern I have is listening to public with a complaint management attitude. If somebody complains something needs to be done, I always think that this one person who complained, there's 99 who may be still happy with status quo. So we don't want a complaint management situation.
Thank you very much. I ask for another 5 minutes, Mr. Khoo. Okay, just 5 minute extension of time. Okay, last question is, sorry, there is a question. Yes, you have only half a minute to talk. We're all squeezed out of time. Yes, I know. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, two questions.
Yeah.
Yes, 15 seconds each.
So have to.
Okay. Oh yes, Kenan, please do.
I'll pass it to you. Okay. I've sat through your ULURP process in terms of the explanation. It's in a way very alien to me. Okay. Before that, I'm Ang Kian Nam. I'm an architect and urban designer in private practice. Okay. So I sat through your explanation. And is highly participatory from the citizens. In a way, I'm not used to it, because here what I am used to is I submit plans, to whichever department, and nowadays I seem to get a lot of rejection. And it's always what the government says, and then we appeal. Okay, it is a very straightforward process. So when I look at your process, if for example the government agencies, whatever agencies, like for example the cycling path, because I think in the year 2000 plus 8 or 9.
Kenan, you have a very good point. I need you to speed up.
Okay. The mayor wanted the whole place to have a cycling infrastructure. So how do you implement that? Because a cycling infrastructure, that was, I think, back in 2008 or 2009, if I'm not wrong. So how do you use the process of ULURP to design and implement? And as a related question, in New York, do you normally go to outside parties to get the expertise and
International
the whole job?
experts.
Yes.
Branded international experts.
Yes. And then just implement it, or do you also consciously groom your own homegrown talent so that the implementation can be complete and thorough?
Okay, let me rephrase what he's trying to say. In Singapore, it's very popular, and perhaps I would call it a stigma, that we are not good enough. We need foreigners who are reputable to tag the brand on us. So is that what you're saying? Yes, for the part 2. So this is a comment. In New York, do you always get experts from outside to come and help you, or you think your people knows enough?
Well, I'm here, right? I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn. So I would say that we, in the past, had not. And then under, I think, our previous head of our agency, she actually invited architects to have a greater role in the design of buildings than they had had previously. And I think that is important. And
Local architects?
not necessarily local architects, and I think some of the developers then read the sort of between the lines, not between the lines, but they sort of knew that if they came in with a big name architect, a star architect, that they could possibly get better, a better decision, or not decision, but a better, more support from our agency than if they came in with just a local schmo architect. And I actually think there's value in that if you are working on a large project, to think out of the box and to think of hiring a good architect and a good designer. I just want to point out that in New York City, what is subject to this ULURP process is maybe 1% of development. Most development, 99%, takes place without any of this. We call it as of right. It is your right as a property owner under zoning to build a building that complies with the zoning and building codes. And so no ULURP is required. All you do is you go to the buildings department, that's our review agency, and they make sure that your plans comply, and if they do, they must issue you a permit, right? It's only when they say, well, you know, you want more stories, you want more density, a different use, that you can't do, that they come to us for a change in zoning. And I think we have one more.
Thank you. So my name is Giacomo. I'm doing a Master in Public Policy at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and actually worked for a year in the Office of Citywide Procurement in New York, so I'm somewhat familiar with how it works over there. My question was to take the discussion back to the original topic of public participation. So you mentioned that sometimes the public has no interest in participating. Can you do anything to facilitate that interest? Can you train planners in listening to participation, and what lessons can you learn, and what lessons are you trying to learn for future rounds of this type of planning, like what you did in East New York for the future, and for what you will try to do in other boroughs? Thank you.
So, right, I said that they don't want to, but maybe they don't have time to. Or maybe we as planners have to sharpen our skills, and how do we make it interesting? How do we make them care about some of these things? And in the end, you know, one of the criticisms we faced during our planning for work for East New York was we're not reaching out to enough people. And I have to say, you know, there's a balance between what Alex mentioned, where the dog park people come and overwhelm the discussion, and drown out the people who may want to have a street rebuilt to make it safer and more pedestrian friendly, and then total apathy. And you know, sometimes you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Sometimes you can bring the planner to the community board meeting, or the community, but they may have no interest, and that's a frustration that I face and others face, and I think in that case, I would say I think we're getting to a point where we want to talk back as planners too, and say, wait a minute, you cannot vote this down. You have no, it's almost like you want to say, you have no right to vote this down because you've never bothered to engage with us on this, right? We've done every single thing to try and engage you, and you've ignored us. And you are not taking, you know, you want us to take you seriously, well, you have to take us seriously too in your decision-making process. And I think that's where Alex and I are facing our frustrations. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Sorry, we have no time to add. No. Thank you. But it certainly seems like you are operating in the opposite side of the world from us and thinking. So I want to quickly run through one or two other things, and we close. I must close. The last question, to be number 5, is Singapore planning appeal process effective and accessible? There are instrumentations such as appeal to the Ministry of the M&D Minister. Kian, you were talking about you being thrown out. Where can you go? To the minister, or is there a planning appeal inspector? I'm one of the planning appeal inspector, and I hardly do any case. So we won't discuss, but I will let this tickle your mind because we have no more time. If you want to talk more about this, later on we're going to have a little coffee and tea together. You're welcome to join us. So 2 more comments, and I need to close, is that New York City over the years has become a very livable city. And as one of the first recipients of Lee Kuan Yew World City Award. So I commend you for the good work you have done. And number 2, actually, in between here, there's great opportunity for Singaporean, all of us. Why do I say that? Can you remember he said there are 15 neighborhoods that he is trying to turn around, like 15 neighborhoods in Kallang, okay, or a fringe of city that is trying to turn around, and at this moment is still a little bit dilapidated, and there's a lot of opportunity. And interestingly, I think we can do business. You know why? Because I keep hearing you saying that New Yorkers want to rent, you don't want to buy. But Singaporeans, we love to buy. We have very high ownership. So, Lian, I think we can go into business and go to New York to buy the real estate and develop and sell to all the individual Singaporean who loves to buy all the apartments, and then we rent to you. Oh, no.
For the record, no.
Of course, he has to say no officially, but things can be arranged on the ground. Okay, so anyway, I see opportunity because yesterday's paper, New York City is for sale in Singapore, for your information, right? Yes. So, and New Yorkers also come to Singapore and buy our land too. So I can buy your backyard, you can buy my backyard. Yes? So, so a little opportunity here. So explore with us. I think it's a very interesting, and I like to work on this. Any other last burning desire or comments before we close?
Thank you for the talk earlier today. I'm John. I work at URA as well in the research department. I think there's kind of 2 competing strands within planning. Obviously, in the American context, there's a core of participatory planning, which is at the center of how things work, and the trend of macro-scale planning, a la Robert Moses, had faded away. Although, if you look at Plan NYC in 2007, I think, there is more of that large-scale planning happening again. And in the popular discussion, there's a lot of big data The NYU Center for Urban Science and Progress, there's this kind of technocratic mindset coming back in. How do you see those two forces playing out? Do you see the rise of a scientific approach to planning helpful to counteract maybe overly precocious members of the public? How do you see that balancing going forward?
So yeah, no, I agree that with technology we have a greater array of tools to use, and I don't want to say macro planning. I say as the pendulum swings back, more rational planning. And I think we are, we just had a couple of citywide actions that were before every single community board. And most of the pushback was not based on the rational discussion. It was on broader planning policy issues. And I speak for myself, but I think it's commonly shared. Like we should have, instead of focusing on the rational, minor kind of like fixes and tweaks that we love as like zoning aficionados, we should have gone in first and just had this discussion about planning policy and had these kind of discussions. And I think that's kind of where the participatory thing is getting down in the policy, and then you can have the rational discussion and use the numbers and do the Plan YC discussion. And there has to be a balance, but you can't just do rational planning right now.
As a final note, I think URA is very established in having all your research figure of the caveat as open as possible to the market. So people of Singapore knows what are all the transactions that are in the market. Very good for us to have real benchmarking. But on the other hand, I think there could be more sharing of information that many a time as planner, as architect, when we submit approval, we are disadvantaged because URA often says that they have a certain population or whatever data that they have to keep, and so therefore they say no to us because we don't fall in line. Interesting comment, maybe debatable, but nevertheless we have no time to further discuss. So I have negotiated with Winston. Those people who want his PowerPoint can go through CLC, you send in the request, and you can have a copy of his PowerPoint. It's for only personal consumption. Is that correct?
Well, the images are not always my own or ours, so that's why.
Thank you very much for coming, and on behalf of CLC, I want to thank all the gentlemen and the audience for a very active discussion. I think surely in your mind there are many other things you want to ask. Please don't hesitate to come to us. We're available here for the next 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for that very exciting and interesting discussion. We would now like to invite Mr. Khoo Ting Chai, Executive Director of the CLC, on stage to present tokens of appreciation to all panelists and to take a photo together. Mr. Khoo, please. At the same time, can I just make an announcement that we've found a Samsung phone outside the auditorium. So if there's anyone who's lost a phone, you can come to the front to claim it. There's a name at the back which says Fu Sun Ling. So if there's a Mr. or Miss Fu Sun Ling. Okay, found it. Okay. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture... Sorry. This lecture marks the end of the CLC lecture series for 2015. We thank you for your participation and do stay tuned to the CLC mailers and website for more information on our upcoming events in 2016. We will also be seeking your feedback via email and would greatly appreciate if you could take some time to help us improve the lectures. Have a good evening and hope to see you again in the new year.